The night he tried to erase her began like every other night she had learned to survive, quiet on the surface and violent underneath, the kind of silence that hums in your ears and warns your heart before your mind can catch up. Emily Carter stood in her own kitchen feeling like a guest in a life that no longer belonged to her, watching the man she once loved move through the room as if she were already invisible, as if her existence were an inconvenience he planned to correct. He had been rewriting her life for years, piece by piece, memory by memory, until even she sometimes forgot who she used to be, and that was exactly how he wanted it. If stories of kindness, second chances, and ordinary people choosing to do the right thing still matter to you in a world that often feels cold, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this story begins in darkness but it does not end there. Emily had once been the kind of woman who laughed easily, who remembered birthdays, who believed love meant safety, but marriage to Thomas Carter slowly sanded her down into something quieter and smaller. Thomas was respected in town, the kind of man who shook hands firmly and smiled at neighbors, the kind who volunteered at community events and spoke about loyalty and family values as if they were medals pinned to his chest. Behind closed doors, though, he treated Emily like a mistake he regretted making, correcting her words, dismissing her feelings, and reminding her often that she had nowhere else to go. He controlled the bank account, the car keys, the narrative of who she was, and over time he convinced her that her own memories were unreliable, that her pain was exaggerated, that her worth was conditional. He did not need to hit her to hurt her. His favorite weapon was erasure, the slow deletion of her confidence, her voice, and her identity. The night everything changed, Thomas had decided he was done pretending. His frustration had been building for weeks, fueled by a new job offer in another city and a woman at work who laughed at his jokes and looked at him like he was the hero of his own story. Emily, in his mind, had become a liability, a witness to a version of himself he wanted to forget. He told her she was leaving, not him, and that no one would question it because people already believed she was unstable, emotional, difficult. He had been planting those seeds for years, telling friends and family that Emily struggled, that she imagined things, that he was doing his best. That night, he took her phone, her wallet, and her wedding ring, laying them on the counter like evidence from a crime scene, and told her to pack a bag and disappear quietly if she knew what was good for her. Emily's hands shook as she stuffed clothes into an old duffel bag, her mind racing through every bridge he had burned on her behalf. Her parents were gone, her closest friend had moved away years ago, and Thomas had seen to it that she drifted from everyone else. She felt foolish for having believed that love could not turn cruel, ashamed for not leaving sooner, terrified of what would happen if she stayed and equally terrified of what would happen if she left. When he pushed her out the door and locked it behind her, the sound echoed in her chest like a final verdict, and she stood on the porch for a moment staring at the house that had once felt like home, realizing she had been evicted from her own life. She walked for hours with no destination, the cold biting through her thin jacket, the streetlights blurring as tears filled her eyes. Every passing car made her flinch, every shadow felt like a threat, and the world seemed enormous and indifferent. She reached the edge of town where the road stretched empty and dark, the kind of place where you realize how small you are and how easily you could vanish without anyone noticing. That was when she heard the rumble of engines, low and thunderous, approaching like a storm she did not have the strength to outrun. The motorcycles appeared first as headlights, then as shapes, leather and chrome cutting through the night. Emily's heart pounded with fear and exhaustion as she stepped back, clutching her bag like a lifeline. The group slowed when they saw her, the bikes rolling to a stop along the shoulder of the road, and she prepared herself for another kind of danger, another reminder that the world was not safe for women alone at night. What she did not expect was the way one of them removed his helmet slowly, carefully, as if he did not want to startle her, or the concern etched into his weathered face. Jack Morrison had lived most of his life on the road, a former mechanic turned long-haul rider who believed freedom was found somewhere between destinations. He had seen a lot in his years traveling from town to town, enough to recognize fear when it stood shivering in front of him under a broken streetlight. He did not ask invasive questions or make assumptions, he simply offered presence, the kind that says you are not alone right now, and that alone was enough to make Emily's knees buckle with relief. Emily told them pieces of the truth, not everything, because years of being silenced had taught her to ration her honesty. She said she needed somewhere safe to sit, somewhere warm, and Jack nodded, gesturing toward a small roadside diner a few miles back that stayed open all night. The group rode slowly, surrounding her like a shield as she sat behind Jack on his bike, gripping his jacket with hands that had forgotten what it felt like to trust another human being. At the diner, under harsh fluorescent lights and the smell of burnt coffee, Emily finally allowed herself to breathe. Jack listened as the rest spilled out, the control, the gaslighting, the way Thomas had tried to rewrite her reality until she doubted her own mind. Jack did not interrupt or minimize her pain. He listened with the kind of attention that makes you realize how starved you have been for validation. He had grown up watching his own mother disappear under a similar weight, and he recognized the patterns immediately, the quiet cruelty that thrived on secrecy and disbelief. What Emily did not know was that Thomas had already begun the final phase of his plan. By morning, he had filed a report claiming Emily had suffered a breakdown and wandered off, hinting that she was a danger to herself. He called her workplace and told them she needed time off, called acquaintances and shook his head sadly, performing concern while tightening his grip on the narrative. He believed he had done this perfectly, that no one would question a respected man whose wife had always seemed a little fragile. Jack questioned it immediately. Something about the urgency in Emily's fear, the way she flinched at the mention of Thomas's name, did not match the story of a woman who simply left. Against Emily's instinct to stay hidden, Jack encouraged her to be seen, to document what had happened, to reclaim her voice before it was buried under someone else's version of events. He helped her contact a local women's shelter, where advocates listened and believed her without hesitation, where she was given a bed, clean clothes, and the radical gift of being treated like a person again. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, statements, and exhaustion, but for the first time in years, Emily felt something shift inside her. Each form she filled out, each meeting she attended, felt like a small rebellion against the man who had tried to erase her. When Thomas arrived at the shelter demanding to see his wife, his performance fell apart in the face of witnesses, documentation, and the quiet authority of people who knew abuse when they saw it. Jack was there too, standing silently in the background, a reminder that Emily was no longer isolated, no longer easy to intimidate. The investigation uncovered what Emily had lived with in silence, the financial control, the false narratives, the pattern of manipulation that Thomas had perfected over years. Friends who had once doubted Emily began to piece together moments that suddenly made sense, apologies that felt too polished, explanations that no longer held up under scrutiny. The town that had admired Thomas began to see him clearly, and the image he had curated so carefully cracked under the weight of truth. Emily's healing was not immediate or simple. There were nights she woke up convinced she was still trapped, days when her confidence evaporated without warning, moments when the urge to apologize for existing rose in her throat. But there were also small victories, like opening her own bank account, choosing her own meals, laughing without fear of being corrected. Jack checked in occasionally, never hovering, never claiming credit, simply reminding her that help could come from unexpected places and that strength did not always roar. Months later, Emily stood in a small apartment that was entirely hers, sunlight spilling across the floor, plants she had chosen lining the windowsill. She had returned to work, reconnected with old friends, and started therapy that helped her untangle the knots Thomas had tied in her mind. She no longer introduced herself as someone's wife, she introduced herself as Emily, and that felt like a triumph. Thomas faded into the background, his reputation permanently altered, his attempts at control neutralized by accountability and exposure. He had tried to erase Emily, to reduce her to a footnote in his story, but instead, he had forced her into a journey that led her back to herself. And Jack, the biker who spoke up when it mattered, returned to the road with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, simply refusing to look away can change the trajectory of a life. If this story reached something deep inside you, if it reminded you that courage can come from strangers and that kindness can interrupt cruelty, take a moment to like this video, share it, and let your support be part of the ripple that keeps stories like Emily's alive. And before this story ends, tell us in the comments what part stayed with you the most, or if you've ever witnessed a moment where speaking up changed everything. Emily still thinks about that night sometimes, about how close she came to disappearing, about how easily the world could have kept moving without her. But then she looks at the life